welcome to another episode of the CPGGUYS podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg, explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPGGUYS.
Hello and welcome to the CPGGUYS podcast. I'm of course Sri, your co-founder and host of the CPGGUYS and co-founder and partner of Think Blue, your key to unlocking your profitability potential. As builders, connectors, and amplifiers, we shape the future of commerce to drive your growth. Please do listen to my older daughter Ria Raj's music at www.riaraj.com. That's RHEARAJ. And my younger daughter Lara Raj is a member of the Geffen Records UMG Universal Music Group Cat's Eye Band. While my wife Kavita Raj has her own podcast, Lights Camera Convo, on iHeartRadio and all streaming platforms. Not joining me today is, of course, Mr. Peter V.S. Bond, my co-host, and when he's not co-hosting this podcast, he serves as Partnership Acceleration Lead at Flywheel, a division of Omnicom that helps enterprise brands improve their SEO and SEM, growing their e-commerce businesses. Before we get to our guest today, we ask that you help spread the word about this community we've created in the CPGGUYS beyond sharing our podcast with your friends. If you're using Apple Podcasts or Spotify as your preferred listening platform, leave us a rating as it helps feed the algorithm and makes us more findable by CPG retail people like you looking for education and entertainment. The rating tells us how we're doing. The review tells us if we're having the right conversations with the right people. We're happy that the CPGGUYS is now part of an impressive collective of highly rated podcasts, including CPG Scoop with Risa and Jennifer, and the FMCG Guys with Daniel, Efrain, and Christine. Links to our podcast, our sister casts, and of course, the social media profiles of my daughters, Ria and Laura, my wife's podcast, may be found in the digital liner notes of this episode. So let's get to the main event today. Today's CPG landscape has accelerated a decade in the last 4 years since the beginning of the pandemic as far as omnichannel retail is concerned. A whole maturity with a digital shopper, habits on how to build a path to purchase is emerging in the CPG industry. Along with this, technology advances of retail media has simply become the next word in our industry, ripe for disruption and expansion beyond what we fathom. In fact, I was recently at Possible at Miami, Shop Talk Europe at Barcelona, the Cannes Lions Festival over in France, and the Retail Media Summit up in Chicago hosted by Pat to Purchase Institute. The talk of the town everywhere has been retail media, including the rapid evolution to in-store retail media. Well, what do we know? One of the challenges that has plagued it for 4 years now is the measurability of success. Every RMN talks to success metrics that it champions. What qualifies a successful campaign? To decompose right, wrong, what's next with measuring success at retail media networks? Who do we have today as our guest? None other than one I have waited for a long time to get on the show, and that is Jeff Bustos, VP of Measurement Addressability Data of none other than IAB, which is the Interactive Advertising Board. Jeffrey, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. It was awesome to be able to meet you in person at Cannes, probably the best way to meet someone in person. And yeah, excited to be at CPGGUYS finally. It's truly a dream.
Yeah, we had to cross the Atlantic pond and travel 7,000 miles to meet in person, but sometimes that's what it takes. I'm glad that you chose to come on the show today. And I'm incredibly excited to speak with you about the space of retail media. But before we get to the detailed questions that I've prepared for you today, it would be great if you give us a brief overview of the IAB and your specific role there.
Yeah, so the IAB is an industry setting and best practices setting trade group, nonprofit, that we've been leading best practices and standards for the digital advertising ecosystem since the early 2000s. We defined what a click was. And over the years, we've continued to develop standards and best practices to ensure there's sustainable and healthy growth in advertising. And my role at the IB as the Vice President of Measurement, Addressability, and Data is really focusing on retail media. So I've been developing measurement standards, best practices around retail media, both on-site, off-site, and now a lot of conversations on in-store. I also do a lot of work on data clean rooms and any sort of privacy-enhancing technologies. And I think that, we're seeing a lot more data clean rooms kind of being used into retail media. So it's kind of fun to see how my various roles at the IAB are converging.
That is fascinating indeed, and thank you for that summary, Jeff. In the digital liner notes of this episode, we'll place links to your LinkedIn profile, of course, IAB's LinkedIn page, and of course, the website. That way, the people listening can easily connect back with you straight from their smartphones as they're listening. And now we get into the main events. You ready, Jeff?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Your career, of course, spanned Interpublic, WPP, Omnicom, Search, And now I call you the king of measurement because you're actually going to set the standards and already on your way to setting the standards for the industry for RMNs. So take us through the years from graduating Florida International Universities through this career journey, through WPP, Omnicom, Interpublic, all the search leadership you had, and now at IAB. And for someone who wants to excel in this space, what would be your advice to them?
I would say ask a lot of questions and read a lot. After finishing college, I applied to 400 jobs to get my first job in advertising. And I was working for a small agency called FlightPath, working on the Goya account. And then, I started in paid search, but I was, always hungry to do more. And I, before joining FlightPath, I actually taught myself paid search to kind of get my foot in the door. And then when I was Interpublic, I had the awesome opportunity to do a lot of social, which was truly awesome. And then moving on to MediaCom, I worked in a lot of commerce accounts, specifically Dell, which was a team that really helped me grow. And I was able to test various different activations within search. And there was a huge focus on measurement as we tried to be as optimal as possible. And then when I moved over to Omnicom, I actually had the opportunity to move more to a data strategy role, which was much more exciting. I would say kind of just my advice to anyone trying to break in, just ask a lot of questions, read a lot, and just kind of be a sponge the first few years.
That is awesome, Jeff. Thank you for that. So let's get into the topic of RMNs, which is why you joined us today. RMNs have obviously evolved significantly in the last 4 years, from where they were 4 years ago, just still the early days, I would say, to where they are, over matured, over evolved. Every retailer has one. It's still a little bit chaotic land, how people are measuring success, the type of dollar investment seeked, etc. What are today's hardest critical challenges in RMNs?
There's probably two. The first one is measurement. And what we try to do with the measurement standards that we published last year and formally this year was that, how do you standardize an industry that also needs a lot of flexibility? For example, Best Buy, Kroger should not have the same measurement models because they have different purchasing behaviors, data frequency, loyalty type of data. So it was kind of like, how do we focus on the really non-derived metrics, the most basic parts of measurement, provide best practices on when you're going to do more advanced measurement, depending on your data set and quality, how to approach each of the different models. And what we're doing now is that we're looking to create a sort of scorecard that we're going to be evaluating retailers on how they're progressing towards measurement standards. And I would say the second thing is, within that same standardization and flexibility, 36% of brands are investing in 10 or more retail media networks. The human and resource and time cost of retail media, not just the media cost of it, is substantial. And the more different retailers are, the more they're going to be inhibiting their growth. And obviously, you want to be able to personalize a lot of, your retail media activations, but there also needs to be more consistency. And I think one of the things we talked about when we were at Cannes was like, the only way retailers are going to get those national brand dollars is if you make buys as easy to do a national brand buy, where you can have the same audience across every retailer, the same specs, the same taxonomy. So we're definitely a long way away, but I think those are kind of the two main challenges.
You briefly mentioned a scorecard of some sort there. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about the scorecard and what brands can expect out of that scorecard, and can they use it as a little bit of a guidebook on who is evolved and who's less evolved?
Yeah, so the scorecard will be evaluating brands to see how they're viewing each of the different retailers and how they think each of the retailers are. And the scorecard is based on the measurement standards that we publish. So it's trying to evaluate that. And then we're also sharing the scorecard when we're right now working on the scorecard with the retailers so that they can identify what areas they're prioritizing. Because again, there is nuances to a retailer. So, a retail that has a huge offsite presence will probably focus more on just data deduping and audience segmentation, whereas a retailer that has more an on-site presence is really going to focus more on viewability standards, whereas a retailer that has a larger in-store presence is going to be focused much more on, dwell time and opportunity to see and more of these in-store metrics. So again, it's also how do we ensure that there's that flexibility so that retailers can choose what they want to prioritize, but then helping brands then have that conversation and understand what is being prioritized. across each of the different retailers.
So I'm going to go exactly in that direction next, Jeff, which is not all RMNs are made the same, right? Some are 50 store chains, some could be 5 store chains, some could be 4,700 store chains, some are scaled, some are not, some have significant inventory because they've already got significant outreach in that offsite platforms and partnerships as DSPs, and some have little to no offsite whatsoever. If you're a brand and you're working on media mix, how the heck do you look at any one of these retail media networks and ever bring them into, like what you said, which is if you're not part of national advertising, you're just not going to get the dollars. It's not going to happen because the brand is not going to have that diaspora to choose from of inventory. So if you're a brand, how do you navigate this? Are some retail media networks always going to be lower funnel only?
No, I think retail is definitely going more mid funnel, upper funnel. But I think we kind of look at television because everybody's like retail is going to get television dollars. I can run the same television ad on CNN or a small local network, or I can run it on YouTube, or I can run it on Hulu or Netflix, and it's the same ad, same spec, same audience, same measurement, albeit video measurement has its nuances, but it's consistent across whether you're running a large network, whether it's linear, which is on CTV. And I think that's kind of where brands are kind of asking, we want to have more consistency in the measurement. So I think that's definitely a challenge brands are facing. And when brands starts evaluating these retail media networks, we're seeing some brands kind of being like, we're just going to deal with 7, and after that, we're good. We're just going to do minimal investment. I think a lot of the growth in retail media that we'll be seeing this year, next year, is going to be on being actually able to prove out that performance. Incremental dollars or retail media growth is going to be focused on proving that growth for the brand, especially to what we're talking about as inflation levels off, as category becomes more competitive, as private label continues to grow. Brands are looking to really see what retailers are really driving that incremental growth, and they're going to double down on them. And then ones that aren't, I don't think we're at a point right now that we're going to see decreased investment, but we're definitely going to see a significant plateauing or decrease of growth in the retailers that are not able to kind of deliver the metrics.
So Jeff, doesn't that become a little bit of a paradox? Because I agree with you that the budgets are flattening out. They're not decreasing, but they're not increasing either. But the inventory is going up significantly because most of them are becoming DSPs and they're negotiating all kinds of offsite inventory. But with budgets that are flat, doesn't the budgets then get vanilla spread out over all this new inventory, and therefore the ability to do a good solid marketing mix outcome for an agent from an agency to a brand just becomes tougher?
I do think that agencies definitely are leaning more into MMM modeling, and at the IAB we're going to be doing a lot of research on incrementality and MMM because that's going to play a larger role. I think retailers also should play a larger role in that conversation in helping brands understand the budget allocation. Retailers have a lot of data, so if you're a retailer and you want to tell me, a few offsite opportunities, a few social commerce, some in-store and on-site, I don't just want you to give me a package of being like, this is what you're buying. I think retailers should move towards justifying that budget allocation and being like, hey, this is actually the best budget allocation that will actually drive growth for your brand. And I think a lot of the smarter retailers are trying to do that because the growth in retail media is really focused in that partnership. Can you work with that brand to have that, collaborative growth that where the brand grows, then also the retailer sales grow as well.
And that collaborative outcome that you speak to should be done at a per campaign basis, right? Because not all campaigns are the same. They don't shoot for the same outcomes. They're not the same brands. They're not the same categories. So it's on a per campaign basis. And are you seeing the industry gravitate towards per campaign, or is it still largely, hey, there's a big joint business plan, it's just an execution of the dollars already planned for?
We're still seeing a lot of changes in how brands are restructuring internally. Some of them are having a center of excellence. Some of them are moving towards, having experts within each of the different brands. I think there's pros and cons for each of them. Obviously, if you have a center of excellence, you have all that knowledge there and you have more control on how you're negotiating. At the same time, you're not as nimble as being on the brands, if you're doing it at the campaign level. One of the things we are seeing is that brands are asking for more quarterly JVPs. They're asking for more insight, and I think the big thing is that brands need to ensure that they're talking internally, which is kind of like the thing that they're not doing. Like, you need to make sure that you know what your shopper team is doing. You need to sure what you're, and more important than anything, your commercial team should know what you're doing. Because at the end of the day, like, a lot of these commercial teams are like, what's going on with my P&L? You put all these money here, and now all of a sudden we're not profitable. So I think there needs to be a requirement, and that's probably kind of what your headaches were, and kind of what you're having to deal with. But yeah, I think kind of that's just like ensuring that there's an internal collaboration and communication, and then identifying what is the best way you're doing those JVP negotiations.
One of the reasons for that, Jeff, I feel why there's so much chaos is because over the course of the last 4 years, when COVID first hit, most of the transactability in CPG land, retail land, went down the digital path, where there was click and collect intermediaries like Instacart, like people, there was periods of time for 3 months in many cities in America where you couldn't go inside a store or you had to maintain 6 feet distancing. So guys like myself in commercial roles, we went over to the CMOs and brand teams and we actually asked them to open up media budgets to invest in this lower funnel because trade dollars are already taken. Now we're having a great reconciliation where the attention for CMOs needs to go back to upper funnel and the dollars already committed to this lower funnel search mechanism. And I think that's what's causing the complete chaos. But at the end of the day, you're 100% right. This needs to be a solid cross-functional partnership between commercial leaders who lead the different sales teams across retailers as well as CMOs and brands. And it should have the backing and anchoring of media versus purely lower funnel. And so keeping that as a backdrop now, Jeff, what are the most significant trends or developments at retail media networks right now? The last 3 or 4 conferences I've been at, the oxygen has all been sucked up by in-store retail media being the next bastion, but I worry about the capital required for that.
Yeah, there's definitely a significant capital requirement. I would say that when you think about the growth in retail media and kind of like the challenges, wherever the growth is, I think it's like, for example, the reason we're seeing significant investment in offsite is that as a brand, I can use my same creative specs for any offsite inventory I'm doing. And it's the same audience taxonomy across all these offsite inventories. They already have viewability standards that they're abiding by that, we're kind of telling retailers they need to have their on-site. So like things work pretty nice. I mean, obviously, at fraud, there's a lot of nuances. Not saying that, our digital ecosystem is great, but there's a lot of consistencies that on-site retail media doesn't have. And that's why we're seeing significant growth on off-site. And I would say that, as we go in store, there's a huge capital investment that you were mentioning. And I think that to justify that capital investment, there needs to be more consistency. Retailers, one, are requiring their partners to already come integrated. When retailers kind of set up the retail media networks, kind of their online capabilities, they worked with like 5, 6 different partners that weren't integrated. And then the retailers had to spend all this money and time trying to integrate on-site sponsored products, with display products, with offsite products, with all these different products. And they just weren't really great and they're still having issues with it. So kind of retailers now are saying, if you want me to have this specific capability, or you want me to evaluate your technology, then you need to make sure you're fully integrated with other partners and you can easily plug into my current ecosystem. So I think kind of that's where the challenges are. I think we're going to see a lot more growth in in-store, but you need to get that merchant buy-in. I think retailers, similar to brands, they need to kind of have more of that collaborative effort. We've seen a lot of retailers that are still trying to figure it out. I think everyone's trying to figure it out. But I think getting that merchant buy-in is going to be vital to ensure that you have that cohesiveness in the store, to ensure you're really prioritizing moving products off the shelf, which kind of the merchant's objective. And then you're also monetizing space, but you're not creating a Times Square within a store. And I think also when you think about in-store, I would probably say that, I think a lot of growth in retail media will probably come from supply chain and inventory management and fulfillment, and being able to leverage those data points in your media and vice versa to have more efficiencies for brands. There's a certain store that you can't move product, where you have inventory levels and you can respond to it pretty quickly using media. All of it's automated, but again, you need systems that are integrated And I think that's kind of what retailers right now are really looking to prioritize, partners that are already integrated.
Very well said indeed. And let me remind our audience that today I'm speaking with Jeff Bustos, VP at Interactive Advertising Bureau, aka well known by all of us as the IAB. So let's talk about your stakeholders. So I can't imagine this is easy for you, which is, herding cats and herding cattle over here to work with your industry stakeholders to set standards and best practices for advertising. But you're right in the sense you've done this for decades, so it's not new to you guys either. Very curious to learn, how do you collaborate with your stakeholders and how do you actually establish standards and best practices for advertising? Are you guys hosting like workshops and seminars? Are you bringing all these publishers into a room? Like, how does this happen and how do you land on a standard? Because I'm sure everyone's raising their hand and saying, mine is the only accurate one or mine is the best.
That's a great question. So I would describe my role as I'm kind of just a therapist of retail media. So I'll talk to retailers, I'll talk to brands, I'll talk to agencies, and they'll kind of tell me the frustrations, and that kind of helps me develop the roadmap on what we need to prioritize. We do a lot of workshops and working groups. So kind of when we started the measurement standards, we actually had a CPG brand-only closed-door conversations with CPGs, and we had a conversation with various CPGs. It was like 20 CPGs in the US, and we were able to identify what needed to be addressed for measurement standards. I wrote the standards, and then we worked with the Media Rating Council, which they're the accreditation standard organization in the US. And then we brought in retailers. So we had, all the large retailers, we had all the brands, we had all the agencies. And it was a 4-month project where we had these working sessions in person, online, and we brought 13 retailers. We had Walmart, we had Amazon, Kroger, Best Buy, Home Depot, Lowe's. And then from the brand side, we had General Mills, we had Coca-Cola, we had Pepsi, Monster Energy, and we had all the holdcos, and we had a few tech companies as well. And it was really on kind of having these collaborative meetings, having these compromises, identifying various things. When we looked at in measurement in retail media, I think the biggest part was how we define closed-loop measurement. So we define closed-loop measurement as the ability to measure an ad to an outcome, because it's not only sales. Sometimes you're trying to measure new to brand or traffic to product page, whatever the outcome you're trying to measure, you need to prove that someone saw the ad. So you need to tie that to either a viewability metric or an attention metric or any sort of extrapolation you want to do. And that was probably the hardest thing to get through and kind of work on that. But that basis makes everything else much easier to then move towards other things. And then we had all conversation on incrementality. We talked about different incremental models. How do you measure it? But it starts with a little bit of chaos. You can talk to Brian Gildenberg. He was when we did the in-store playbook, he messaged me and he's like, "This is chaos. How are you going to do this?" And I was like, "Don't worry." So it starts with a little bit of chaos, and then I just kind of bring everything together, and then we have the final product in 3 or 4 months. If it is a standard, we do put it out for public comment, and then we invite anyone to provide feedback. If it's a guideline, we'll just publish it because obviously it does have, it's not like if it's a playbook, we did the insert playbook. There's no public comment period to it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Brian was wrong when he said this is not easy street whatsoever. So now I want to go to data privacy. There's been significant increasing concerns over the last 2-3 years over data privacy, especially RMNs with a significant amount of data they touch and personalization of ads, etc. How do you, when you set these standards, work with these different publishers and DSPs to ensure responsible practices amongst advertisers and publishers?
Yeah, so privacy is a huge priority for us at the IAB. We have a whole legislative group. We have a legal counsel. We're actually going to be starting a privacy working group for retail media. And we'll have our first session at the end of this month in July. What we're really trying to do is ensure that retailers are getting consumer consent and the consumers are understanding how their data is being used. And then also ensuring, as retailers are doing a lot of data partnerships, ensuring that you are ensuring that the data is being anonymized, that the data can be re-engineered. For example, IAB Tech Lab, we publish open private join. which is for data clean rooms. If you're trying to pass data across different data clean rooms, publishers, or partnerships, ensuring that when you do pass that data, there's no re-engineering and you're not leaking any data. So, we're working a lot of standards to ensure that there is that. And then within store, I think that's also a huge focus of us in terms of privacy. There's different ways in which you're measuring in store, and I think all the technologies that exist today are great. We have the minimum standard of opportunity to see, and that just says that you need to prove presence and that there was no obstruction, the ad was viewable. Obviously, there's more advanced technologies for in-store, and I think they're great. But I think that when you look at privacy, I think that it's up to the retailer and the brand to choose the level of measurement. And I think the most basic level should be the opportunity to see. And then obviously you can go into much more advanced measurement capabilities from there.
Well said again, Jeff. Privacy is a very important topic, especially as the cookie deprecation continues going forward every single day from a Google standpoint. Now, the moment we've all waited for, the price question of them all. How is IAB setting standards for retail media measurement? And I want you to take us back to January, where you've actually published a first playbook. Can you take us through what was in the playbook? What can people find? We're going to have a link here on LinkedIn right here to be able to download that playbook. So give us the scoop. What was in the playbook? What can people expect? And can they be using that to input into their campaigns and their marketing mix models as they choose to invest dollars?
When we formally released the measurement standards in January at ALM, we looked at 6 chapters. It's a mix of standards and best practices. And retailers can choose which chapter they want to prioritize and how they want to be standardized. For example, Instacart and Amazon have achieved accreditation on 2 of the 6 chapters already. So we're seeing a lot of adoption from retailers, and other retailers are working towards the MRC auditing process to be accredited. Again, retailers are looking, and we want to make sure that retailers have the flexibility to prioritize based on their business needs. We first started with how audiences are being segmented to ensure there's no deduping, there's more consistency in how they're being taxonomy of the audience. The next focus for us was all really on viewability. We wanted to make sure that the ad was seen. That was definitely a huge concern. For brands. A lot of non-viewable inventory was being attributed to an outcome. They weren't being charged for it, but then, their iROAS or their ROAS was like, $18 for a gallon of milk. Maybe with today's inflation, that doesn't seem that crazy, but, I think that, they just weren't having a lot of certainty in the numbers. So we really focused on ensuring that there was a viewability standard, ensuring that the way you were attributing an impression or an ad to an outcome was consistent across all retailers. And I think from that consistency perspective was also, saying, hey, brands, if we have this 50% standard on viewability, don't try to negotiate for more, because then you're going to get the same issue. Then now you can't compare it across retailers because now you have your own different standards. So it was also kind of like having brands understand kind of like how standards work. And then we had a whole chapter focused on incrementality. It's not a standard on how we did incrementality. It's kind of like, depending on the different incremental models that you're going to be using that are most relevant to your data set, then you would choose the incremental model, and then we had standards and best practices based on that. So there's some flexibility. As I mentioned earlier, you're buying a television every 3 years. You're going to Home Depot and you're doing probably a home project every 6 months to every year. So you buy milk twice a week. The idea that all these 3 retailers should have the same incremental model doesn't make sense. They have different data cadences, different loyalty data. They have different third-party sources that they're bringing into their measurement. So it's really important that we had that flexibility, but from the very basic perspective of how are you looking at how's the data being sourced, how's the data being managed and cataloged, and how are you using models to understand that data, I think that could be consistent. So that's really what we tried to strive for. And then the last chapter was based on digital base-based advertising that was in store. It was really basic, but that's kind of like what we had. And the great thing we did is that we actually partnered with Boston Consulting Group, and then we developed an executive playbook, so that if you don't want to read just 40-page very technical document, you can read a really easy to read, very straightforward 12-page document that tells you what you need to know, what are the priorities, so you can really go into these conversations with the retailer or as a brand and have, really fruitful conversations as you negotiate JBPs or medias or campaigns.
Awesome, Jeff. So let's go to the last question over here, which is another one that is top of mind for everybody, and that's the next AHA and retail media networks evolution. Is it all in-store? Because that's what I'm hearing. Is it offsite inventory? Or is it all about personalization? Those are the three words that I hear all the time.
So I think offsite will continue to grow. I think the great thing with offsite is that we already kind of have a very viable system. Obviously, video measurement has its thing, ad fraud's its thing, but I think, on offsite is pretty much plug and play. And, brands and agencies like it because, again, the resource aspect of it is very low. For in-store, we recently published our digital home and in-store retail media playbook that actually started with what is merchandising. Then we talked about how to create a customer-centric strategy based on the shopper mission. From there, we talked into the different measurement capabilities and approaches. So like how should you be measuring performance in store, different models you can use. And then we also had a deep dive into the various technologies that exist in store, from like beacon technology to biometric technology to cart technology. We did not say that one technology was better than the other. All we did was, this is the technology, this is the description, this is how you should think about it strategically, and this is the measurement considerations. And all these one pages are really meant to help brands and agencies as they're evaluating technologies, and also retailers, to really have a starting point to understand how these technologies play. From there, the biggest thing on in-store is not going to get television budgets until it's as easy to buy in-store. I can't run the same in-store ad across Walmart, Kroger, and Best Buy. I can run the same Super Bowl ad or any ad inventory on video across NBC, Disney Plus, Max, and YouTube. No problem. So I think that's kind of where we're looking at. What we are working on next, real fun announcement here at CPG, guys, is we are partnering with IAB Europe, and we'll be developing in-store standards that we hope to have a global perspective in store. So obviously it's going to be Europe and North America. We're going to have some LATAM retailers, because one of the things we've seen in the last 6 months is that there's actually a lot of innovation and advancement on in-store. I would say that LATAM is probably a little bit more ahead than the US in terms of how they're measuring in-store and how they're activating in-store, just because that's a much bigger bucket. Like in-store right now in LATAM, in some retailers, is 50% of their retail media, whereas in the US, it's still like 5-10%. So I think it's, but yeah, we launch our working group on July 8th. IAB Europe will have a 2-day workshop in Paris, and IAB US will have a 1-hour workshop, just because we had the playbooks, we have more knowledge with our group, and then we're going to have a co-meeting July 23rd, where we're going to bring European retailers, US retailers on a 2-hour workshop online, and we're going to discuss what these in-store standards should be. And then we'll be releasing in-store retail media in-store standards September 17th and 18th at our Connected Commerce event in New York City. So love to have you join us.
You heard it here on the CPG Guys, September 17th, 18th, the conference by IAB will be releasing the new playbook on in-store. I'm sure the whole industry is waiting for that playbook. So just to recap for our audience, January was the online playbook for retail media, and now coming mid-September 17th, 18th, the release of the in-store one, which will focus on Europe, but also have the US component in it from a standard standpoint. Correct, Jeff? That's the way. So these are the two big outcomes for the year, right?
Yeah, and then we'll also be releasing the scorecard that we talked a little bit about to help brands start evaluating retailers and see how they are delivering or how they're approaching or working towards measurement standards.
How awesome, because outcomes is everything. Let me remind our audience that you can find all of our content simply by going to a browser and typing cpgguys.com as our URL. And if you think you or your company has thought leadership to contribute to our community discussion, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. Again, that's contact@cpgguys.com. And maybe you can join us on the podcast just like Jeff did today. Don't forget to drop us a rating, as I mentioned. Your rating and reviews help us because it tells us how we're doing and whether we're having the right conversations with the right guests. You can find that in the top navigation bar of our website. To our 32,000 plus LinkedIn followers, without you, the show doesn't exist. Your clicks, likes, comments, DMs, ask for content is why this show exists in the first place. Thank you from the bottom of our heart. Jeff, thank you for making time right before the July 4th holiday to chat with me today. It was a pleasure to host you here.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Hope to chat again maybe in a few months, and hope to see you at Connected Commerce.
Looking forward to it. And folks, we're going to wrap this one up and see you soon in another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPGGUYS LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPGGUYS LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPGGUYS LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPGGUYS LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.